Morning everyone. I'm Ed Davis from the Hertfordshire Growth Hub. Welcome to this morning's webinar on managing supply chain risk and disruption. And that's going to be presented by Mark Anderson and Emma Tyler from PwC. You should be aware that the session is going to be recorded, so if you prefer to remain anonymous, please turn off your camera and use the chat box function to ask any questions at the end of the session. Mark and Emma are going to speak for around 20 to 25 minutes. There will then be the opportunity to ask questions, so if you could keep any questions to the end, that would be great. I thought I'd start just by explaining a little bit about the Hertfordshire Growth Hub for those of you that aren't aware of the services that we offer. If you're able to just flick on to the next slide, please. So we offer support to businesses across the county through our advisor team and digital platform. Some of the services that we offer include one-to-one coaching, access to finance and funding, support with training and development, and also advice on business planning. We're delivered, as you can see from the bullet point at the end there, we're delivered by an experienced consortium led by Business Support Services Exemplus, alongside the University of Hertfordshire and the Hertfordshire Chamber of Commerce. We try to enable businesses at any stage of their development to access support. So we've been working quite closely with a whole range of businesses over the last month or so, obviously with regard to providing support with regard to COVID-19. If you're able to flick to the next slide. So we have a dedicated COVID resource page, which you can find by following the link on the page there. And that's on our website, which is updated daily with the latest news from the government, and also has lots of details regarding relevant funding schemes, including the business interruption loan, the coronavirus job retention scheme, and also the coronavirus large business interruption loan scheme. There are also lots of other resources that can be found there, including guidance for employers and also for UK businesses that are trading internationally. If you're able to flick to the next slide. Our advisor team are available to answer any queries that you might have between 8:30 and 5:30, Monday to Friday, and full details on how you can get in touch can be seen on the slide there. So if you wanted to take a screenshot or a picture, then please do so. And I'll now hand over to Mark and Emma from PwC to take us through the session, which is on managing supply chain risk and disruption. So over to you guys.
Thanks very much, Ed, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for having us. My name's Mark Anderson, I'm a partner in PwC, and I lead our supply chain resilience proposition. And we're going to talk to you for, I think, some 20 to 25 minutes or so on the issues that we are hearing from our clients in the current environment, and I guess some tips, some practical tips on how you can help manage the rapidly changing situation, which has caused some serious problems for many businesses around supply chain. I guess before I start, I should say I know you're all probably getting used to working on Zoom. I'm very glad that we tested the Zoom call earlier, and that it wasn't last night. I actually let my daughter use my computer last night, and she managed to put a background onto the computer. And so when I had a call early this morning with a client, there was a picture of the Tiger King behind me, which is a large tiger and Joe Exotic. I don't know if any of you have been watching that on Netflix, but anyway, I couldn't get the thing off for the entire duration of the call, so I had to do this call with the client this morning with that behind. So I'm glad that isn't behind me today, and that you just have a picture of my house and garden behind me. Emma, do you want to introduce yourself next, and then we'll go into the session?
Thanks, Mark. Morning, everyone. I'm Emma Tyler. I'm a senior manager in our digital and forensic investigations practice at PwC, based in the Midlands. And one of my areas of focus is supply chain, working with Mark. So delighted to be talking with you about that today.
So what we thought we'd do, if you want to go on to the next slide, There's obviously there's a lot of variety, I think, in how the current crisis is affecting people. Clearly, at PwC, we work with a whole range of clients, small to large, across all sectors, and we have had some clients facing complete shutdowns of their businesses. We've got a lot of manufacturing and sort of construction and other businesses who've had to furlough staff, close sites, pause production entirely. And that's clearly, creating a knock-on effect on supply chain. Something that started as a China issue became a North Italy issue, and suddenly it's global. And really, they are facing issues around, how do they, get certain products into site? How do they look at the timing of different restrictions being lifted, and how do they manage the suppliers in that environment? To the other extreme, we've seen a lot of clients actually facing unprecedented demand. So some retailers, those involved in sort of medical supplies, some of the online businesses, so they've got the total opposite problem, where they've actually had to really rapidly ramp up, look for new distribution channels, new suppliers, and and more people. So really kind of two ends of the spectrum. And what we'll try and do is give some examples of, I think, how those businesses are coping with those two slightly different scenarios. So while recognising there's a whole range of different issues, what we've tried to pull together is, I think, sort of 10 talking points, and we're going to go through those. We won't sort of dwell too long on each one, but what we'll try and do is give you an example of how it's affecting companies, and what are the things that you could do to manage those issues. I'm going to take the top 5, and then the Gemma is going to come in and do the second, and then we'll obviously have some time for questions at the end. So I think, looking first, I mean, supply chains, I think, are going to change forever coming out of this crisis. I think those organisations with flexible supply chains have actually coped pretty well. So we've got some automotive OEMs who have actually managed to shut down entire production sites, and really drop, in some cases, I think they've dropped something like 1 million units across the automotive sector, and actually they've done that pretty efficiently. But I think the organisations that have really faced problems have been those that have very little visibility across the depth of their supply chain. So one of the things that I think is going to change for the future is around really understanding the lower tiers of supplies. So a lot of organisations rely on tier 1 suppliers, and I guess the sort of risk, if you like, is pushed down below that. I think that is going to change significantly coming out of the crisis. Some of the ways that we've been helping clients to sort of manage that risk is to help them map some of those lower tiers of supply chain. And there is data available that can help you do that. But there's also there's also some quite interesting technology on the market that can actually help do some of that for you. But I think the key really is actually to understand your own data and work with suppliers. So we've been working with a couple of clients in the energy and the construction sectors, where we've been helping them model some of their data around supply chain, look at where the real criticality indicators are, not just financial, but also from an operational perspective, and therefore plan, what are the constraints they're going to face, and also get data and communicate better with their suppliers. So, for example, working up information sheets or questionnaires that they can send out to suppliers to get data on lower tiers of supply chain, what the different risks that they are facing are, how are they responding to the current crisis, what are the mitigation plans that they've got in place, and therefore how well placed are they in terms of getting up and running again post-crisis. Clearly, the sort of at the end of the top line, one of the major issues at the moment is the sort of financial health and distress of some suppliers, and especially when you've determined who your critical suppliers are throughout the supply chain, you don't want them to be falling over in the current environment. And most of our clients are very much pursuing what I call a supportive strategy. So it's it's working with suppliers to together to get through the crisis. I think rightly so, people have focused heavily on their own workforce and people and safety and security. And with that taken care of, we're now looking at the sort of the security and safety and operational viability of some of our third parties that we work with, so whether that's suppliers, distributors and others. Liquidity is absolutely key. So and I think the other challenge that a lot of businesses are facing is that a lot of the metrics you would have used to assess financial health are out of date. Were out of date about 3 weeks ago, and really therefore not a hugely useful source of information. But what you can do is still track ratios and liquidity over time. So look at different aspects of cash flow and working capital, and see how they are deteriorating or improving over the last 3-week period. We've been using, we use some technology to harness it, but we've been using media and social media tools to actually give us insight into distress in suppliers. So we're finding social media in some sectors, there's some quite good blogs. Everyone's at home, so people are using social media a lot, and they're on it frequently. So actually keeping track of some of that activity is giving people 2 or 3 days lead time in terms of warning signs or indicators of how suppliers are faring. But I think I also go back to working together. So working up information sheets, requests for information, and having really good dialogue with suppliers around how they are responding. And I think moving sort of further down the chain, once you've assessed criticality indicators, understand financial health of some of your suppliers, there's a range of support mechanisms that you can deploy to help them or make sure that they're okay. And that obviously some of those are things like extending terms. Some of them may be granting some form of short-term loans, but sometimes it's actually just making sure that they get help from government, either in the UK or internationally, that are providing help in the current environment. So you're probably aware that of the government schemes. I heard that there's something like 53 UK government schemes that you can access to get different aspects of funding. There are similar schemes around continental Europe and in the US. So if you do find that you've got international suppliers, a lot of it actually is about just making sure that they are getting access and they understand what sources of finance are available to them. And I think when you've got suppliers who are critical and in real difficulty, you've got some slightly more extreme opportunities or measures you could take. Maybe it's taking equity stakes, accelerated M&A. We've had a couple of clients who are working with others in their sort of supply ecosystem, if you like, to take equity stakes in, to be honest, businesses they probably wouldn't have taken stakes in any other circumstance, but it's vital to their operations. A good example is actually sort of maintenance and repair shops in automotive who face quite high fixed costs. Generally, at the moment, all businesses with very high fixed costs are the ones that are suffering because they don't have too many levers that they can flex. But it might also be renegotiating or helping suppliers renegotiate with landlords around rents and things. At the moment, people are willing to talk, so it is very much a sort of dialogue-based environment. Looking at some of the other issues, I think the other end of the chain, distribution and logistics is pretty important, and we've seen some really massive disruptions. When sort of China got the virus had the virus a few weeks ago, a lot of the logistics providers found that actually the disruption meant that their containers or planes or ships were actually all in the wrong place to deliver things to customers. So I think understanding that and looking for alternatives was key. There were some very innovative alternatives. I heard some manufacturers actually sending people to China with suitcases to bring back parts at some extremes. But I think more it's about understanding what's available and actually what different routes, what different providers are available. Looking for alternatives, but also working with existing distributors to see what solutions you can come up with. On the sort of more on the security side, we have found that there has been a huge upsurge in theft actually, and security issues around sites. Unfortunately, there are opportunists who are looking to take advantage of the situation, and the fact that many people are working from home, sites are less busy. The police are diverted to other issues. So thefts, particularly of high value goods, have gone up. So I think what you should do and can do is make sure you have a proper inventory of where your high value goods are, and that they are secure. And that could be a whole range of different things. It may be actually IP, as opposed to physical goods. We have, Emma's going to talk a little about cyber in a moment, but the number of cyber attacks has gone up exponentially, unfortunately, in the current environment. People taking advantage of people working from home, and loopholes that creates in the security environment. And then I think, again, looking at in the future, we've seen an increase in the use of things like radio frequency ID tokens for tracking of high value goods. You may already use those types of tools already, but that's a good way of keeping track of physical goods, and also obviously just deploying more security precautions. So whether that's physical security or cyber IT security. Some of the clients who run security and cleaning services businesses actually in the current environment are experiencing sort of unprecedented demand as well. So that's a sector that has been actually incredibly busy. And then around some distributors and agents. Again, at the other end of the spectrum, we've had some clients who have had to rapidly onboard new suppliers. We've been helping with some technology platforms around that where you can process sort of controls around things like due diligence on new business partners, payment structures, and controls, much more quickly. So you can accelerate that in the current environment without, and I think it's quite key, without losing or altering the sort of efficacy of your processes. I think it's a sort of, I guess, a warning sign is not to relax controls in the current environment. It's all about accelerating them, and using technology and to be honest, external parties if you need to do that. And then before I hand over to Emma, I'll just talk a little bit about critical labour. Again, I think here. There are some roles in the supply chain that are where there's real shortage of people able to do them. So we've had examples in sort of operators for certain types of machinery, or in sort of pharma, scientists with key roles, in the oil sector. Again, operators of some quite high value and high tech equipment. I think it's really key in resourcing to understand who you have in those critical roles, and similarly who your suppliers have in those roles, and that those individuals are ring fenced for when the supply chain starts back up again. I've had a couple of clients who unfortunately have had some individuals in such roles, and all their families go down with the virus, and there isn't anyone to replace them, and so think about restrictions, additional restrictions that you obviously would need to talk to the individuals about, but just making sure that they are, I guess, extra protected in the sort of restart phase. And around resourcing generally, I think thinking about the restart when restrictions get lifted, how are you going to manage that with your suppliers? Lots of clients are sort of moving to sort of team A, team B, team C type resourcing plans, where you don't have all of your staff in at the same time, so that you can again ring fence key staff members if any of them or their family have to stay away from work. I'll sort of stop there, and I'll hand over to Emma, who's going to talk to you about some of the operational issues on the bottom line.
Great, thanks, Mark. Yes, so as Mark's teed up quite nicely, cyber is one area where it's really gaining traction with clients. You think about how COVID required a lot of organisations to really bring in those remote working practices well above kind of the normal threshold that people are used to. in a very rapid timescale. And as Mark's also said, in terms of some of the rapid onboarding of suppliers, so operations kind of moving and making sure as much as possible that the control framework in terms of the old world is updated to where we are now, and will obviously move to in coming weeks. It's kind of a perfect storm, as Mark said, for those that want to take advantage of that opportunity, unfortunately, but it is reality, and we are seeing that. So some of the things to think about in this space is to try and make those remote working practices and kind of digital operations as secure as possible. And thinking about, as Mark said, in terms of that on-site presence from a physical security aspect, but equally from a cyber and digital perspective in terms of where servers are stored, and obviously having less footfall in office space, and making sure that those things aren't vulnerable. And a great opportunity to think about cyber incident response plans that you may have already had, but also an opportunity to refresh those in terms of thinking about the new risk areas and the new kind of steady state that we find ourselves in. The next area I'm going to talk about is ESG and regulatory compliance. And as obviously COVID has very much disturbed the steady state in this space. And as Mark said, in terms of the rapid supplier onboarding, but also the increased fraud risk, which you may have already read about, there's been a lot about that in the media. The regulators aren't going to, go on standby. They're very much keeping a presence in this space. So thinking about keeping that moving, keeping it very much on the agenda, and people in the organisation focused on that is really key. There won't be a COVID-19 defence for the weeks, months, or years in the future as we move through the phases of the crisis. So thinking about making sure we've got sufficient resource focused on those risks, but also the new risks that have arisen as operations are evolving is very important. So keeping that compliance function very visible, but also agile to respond to the evolving and new risks that potentially weren't there before. And investing now as we come out of the ramp of this, and thinking kind of further down the line in terms of what decisions we're taking now and why we're taking those decisions, and the processes and actions taken is really important, such that if you find yourself subject to queries later down the line, then you've got the evidence of what was taken, what decisions were taken now, and why is really important. And as Mark said, just making great use of the technology and leveraging that to make this as easy as possible in terms of potential upturn in new onboarding, but also kind of the changing commercial partners that you might find yourselves working with in the new world. The next area around contract and commercial. So obviously a lot of organisations are thinking about their commercial position and re-evaluating, getting a hold around the old contractual terms, but also what's changed now. How are we engaging the arrangements commercially with new people, and how that could evolve further, as this is very much an evolving situation, be that with customers, suppliers, or other commercial partners. Now, obviously, key to be able to do that is to have readily available access to do that analysis, in order to map those contracts and understand what your population is. So some things that really help with that is think about how we can map those. So one of the areas that we're with clients where they've got significant volumes of contracts, or very long, complex, lots of terms and intricacies within those, is in terms of a digital review. Moving away from manual to cope with that volume, but also very much to get to the heart of what are the key contractual provisions and terms in there that are of interest to you, or could potentially be contentious, thinking about how things could evolve into claims further down the line, which I'll touch on shortly. So very much about understanding what those key provisions are. What does that mean in the current world? How could they evolve? What does that mean for the business, so that you've got that bird's eye view of that, you've got the key areas to focus on, and obviously then proactively mitigate that risk and take action accordingly and manage them going forwards. which leads nicely into claims and losses. So contract and commercial is very much what people have been doing over recent weeks, are now, and will continue to do so. The claims and losses potentially coming further down the line that you might be looking to enact, but equally could be enacted the other way. It's very much a two-way process. And there's obviously been a lot of discussion about force majeure that's been in the press as to whether that will apply, and a lot of significant disruption and impact that has on the norm and operations, potentially not being delivered as they would have been in the past, and people looking to recover those losses and make claims. So whilst those various recovery mechanisms that might come into play in the weeks and months and potentially years longer term to come might be not completely clear, what is absolutely important is to make sure that those decisions taken now, and start thinking about some of those foundation stages around data and evidence that could support you wanting to enact a claim, but equally potentially responding to one that you might find yourself facing in the future. So very important to think about, as we touched on there, in the contract to commercial sense, thinking about the contracts that are a risk of failure or delay. So we've got a handle on what those potential areas, issues could be coming down the line. To understand what information is available to us now to support or defend those claims, but equally thinking about what is it that is important that we don't have sight of at the moment. How do we get that? And then once we've established that, thinking about how best to store that and evidence and capture that information for the future. And that's very much one of the things we do when we work with a lot of clients in the investigation space is that e-discovery piece, in order to have that to hand and to be able to evidence that and support claims or respond to regulatory investigations as well. So the final area I wanted to cover was tax. So I think from a tax perspective, this follows the tax consequences follow many of the business issues that we've covered on the session already today, but very much wants to be proactively managed and think about what impact various operational changes, be that new or kind of refinement of the old norm, could have from a tax perspective. Particularly from an indirect tax perspective, it can have a major impact. So some things to think about in this space could be, as Mark touched on and Ed at the outset, in terms of the various emergency tax measures, be that deferring tax or wage relief schemes that are out there and available for people to use. Also to think about how goods are moving, potentially if you've got them moving across borders, and thinking about the best way to optimise that in terms of the tax impact for that, so you're getting the best that you can in terms of those movements from a tax perspective, recognising that those patterns could have changed quite significantly because of the disruption. And then finally, thinking about from a staffing perspective and a personnel perspective, have we got the right people focused on some of the compliance areas for tax and kind of wider compliance reporting, in order to keep on top of that now and in the future as well. Mark, is there anything you want to add to that?
I don't think so, Emma. That's covered it. I mean, clearly, we don't have clients who are sort of, I think, facing issues or considering all of these areas at the same time. But hopefully there are, within this, a number of areas that might resonate for your business, and hopefully that's been helpful to sort of tell you, I guess, give you some at least solidarity that others are feeling those issues, and also some practical tips on how you might manage them now and in the future. But I think on the next slide, I think, Emma, we had just sort of summarised very briefly some of those sort of remedies, key activities and options for diagnosing and prioritising response efforts. And I think what we were proposing to do now, Ed and Alison, is leave this slide up and take questions from the floor.